Hi, everyone. My name is Ashish Kutiala, and I'm Chief Marketing Officer here at Traceable AI. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you today to this chat, and this webcast we're having today with Jyoti and Alissa. To set the context, why are we here today? We all know and observe and, are in the process of building modern applications that now live and grow and evolve in the cloud. They really enable like lightning fast innovation for us and responsiveness. But as we do that, as we build more innovation faster, more frequently, it comes with inherent security risks. So today I invited two guests here to have a discussion. It's going to be a discussion around like the concept of building fast apps and the security challenges around it. So with me today, I have Jyoti Bansal. Jyoti is a serial entrepreneur and a tech visionary. He has founded several ventures, including AppDynamics, where he was also their CEO, and AppDynamics was acquired by Cisco. He subsequently founded Big Labs, a startup studio, Harness, a company involved in CI/CD, part of the software business, Unusual Ventures, which is a VC firm, and Traceable AI, which he started, last year. And Jyoti has more than 20 patents to his name. My second guest here is Alissa Knight. Alissa Knight is a recovering hacker of 21 years. She is a CISO at a bank, Qontic Bank. She is a serial entrepreneur. She has so many businesses and so many interests that it's hard to keep up. She publishes books, ebooks. She writes. She's is a very good author and likes to create content that is adversarial. And it's a lot of fun to kind of read that. So, welcome both of you to the show. It's my pleasure to have both of you here.
Thanks, Ashish. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great to be here.
I always love hanging out with Jyoti.
Awesome.
I
So,
like your title, Recovering Hacker, Alissa.
Yeah, I figured it encompasses just everything. So yeah, I
so
don't know if I'll ever be fully recovered. So
yeah, no, we have to touch upon that as we talk through this, right? So, let me ask my first question to Jyoti. Jyoti, you founded and you run multiple companies today. Like, you're running more than three or four or five companies today. But you're also an investor in high growth software companies as a VC, as a venture capitalist. What are you hearing from customers about their need for velocity and speed of development? And, like why? I mean, we all know why we need to do this, but what are you hearing as you are sit on the board of so many companies, as you run your companies, building software, listening to customers? Like, give us your perspective.
Sure. Yeah. At the heart of it, I'm always a recovering software engineer. The way my friend Alissa is recovering hacker here is like, and I would, to me, software engineering this is the most golden moment for software engineering, that we can take very disruptive ideas in almost any domain, finance and insurance and retail and manufacturing, healthcare, and very quickly convert that into major disruptive innovation. And that's what I'm seeing, as I'm, as I talk to multiple customers of the companies I'm involved in, and as we invest in companies as venture capital, that the pace of innovation and the pace of disruption is so high. Like, who could have imagined, like, that like some like very well established, like 100-year-old established banks and their businesses, like suddenly in a manner of like 5 to 7 years, you have this whole wave of fintech companies that can completely disrupt their business models. If you look at, like, healthcare, similar kind of thing happening, and manufacturing, similar kind of thing happening, insurance, similar kind of thing happening. So the software innovation and the pace of software innovation is a must have. Like, if you don't do it fast, someone else will disrupt you, and someone else will very quickly, really build, a fundamentally different business model based on software. And so there is a high amount of pressure. Like, you're a startup, you have to innovate very fast. If you're a large company, you have to also compete with those startups to innovate very fast and build software very fast. Otherwise, you just not going to be able to keep up.
No, absolutely makes sense. And we see, more innovation, more features, like even in everyday apps that we use, right? Like whether it's on our Android phone or our iPhone, or each time I open my banking app, it's got a new feature in it. And I can imagine, like, the enterprises have to deliver this even B2B or B2C, like, at the same pace. So what you're telling us is like, there's a lot of innovation, a lot of frontiers being pushed out there, a lot of new things that, customers can use, consume. and interact back with businesses. So my next question actually is to both of you, which is, there's a lot of microservices, APIs, cloud native technologies that are being, deployed to kind of build these applications and go up. How is this changing the app development model itself, right? It used to be, very traditional. You release code like once every 6 months, there was 3 months, or once a month. There's code almost being delivered like hourly by minute right now, right? So the whole application development model has changed. So Jyoti, from your perspective, what does that mean? And then Alissa, from your perspective, like you're both a CISO, you are looking at the security of any software that is released. And and my next part to that question is, the hacker, what does it mean to you as well? So Jyoti, I'll start with you, and then Alissa, I'd love to hear your viewpoint on that.
Yeah. So I'll start here, Ashish. So good question here. But we have to start with why are people adopting microservices? Why are people adopting cloud native? And that all comes to a previous comment around the pace of innovation, right? So the people needed to move fast, and instead of 6 months to innovate on a new feature that someone else will if someone else would do it faster, you are at a significant disadvantage. So the pressure to innovate is high. So people started with can you do agile development, which is instead of doing long waterfall releases, can you ship things in smaller portions? So that was the first movement that happened. Then the cloud infrastructure was a second movement that happening. Then instead of buying servers and hardware, can you just rent it on demand instantly and get more servers and hardware? But the third movement that is happening is the architectural movement as part of it, which is the shift to microservices and APIs, so that you can break your piece of code into smaller, composable, granular pieces of code, and you can ship them independently. That each of these pieces of code have APIs that they can interact with each other. Each of these pieces of code, different dev teams, maybe when a 2%, 5% dev team can own a microservice and ship that code. They all interact with each other through well-defined interfaces internally, but also externally. And it started with internal APIs, and now it's all external as well. Because everything is composed of different pieces of code that is written by different organizations now, and so they have to connect through APIs and interact through APIs as well, right? So that is the only way to solve the problem of innovation. But it comes with the challenge from as I said, from a security perspective. How do you secure all these APIs? Now you are there, which has multiple challenges on first, how do you even keep up with what all are there? People, you are empowering the developers to build these microservices, build these APIs, and which is the right thing because you have to move fast. But then you have to figure out what are they building? Is it secure? Did they miss something? Did they create a bug somewhere which someone can exploit? And can they so that's where the major security challenges are, and that's where it'd be interesting to see a hacker perspective from my friend Alissa here on if the developers are moving this fast and making all these changes, what opportunities it creates for hackers to exploit there.
Yeah, I'll answer this question from two perspectives, right? Because I kind of always feel like I have this perfect dichotomy of defender and attacker, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, or Mrs. Hyde in a single body. So as a bank CISO, what definitely keeps me up at night is that speed to market. And I'm always constantly feeling that pressure from the business side and from infrastructure and operations to try and push new services, new applications out as quickly as possible. What keeps me up at night is really the developers deploying new what is referred to as shadow APIs. They have administrative access to the cloud service environments, to the cloud service providers, where they can quickly and easily deploy new APIs that we don't know about, that my team doesn't know about. And we can't secure what we don't know we have. And so that's a real concern. It's a real threat for me. This just happened recently where, some APIs were up there and deployed, and, the infrastructure and operations team had used or leveraged web application firewall from the cloud service provider to secure them. And with my experience, which I just published in the new Traceable white paper, The Price of Hubris, I talked about how a lot of the APIs I breached were protected by WAFs, and how they fail with authorization and business logic-based attacks. So that's what keeps me up at night as a CISO. As a hacker, I love speed to market. I love, as a hacker, companies wanting to be first to market and wanting to do continuous delivery, continuous development, and not having that security part of the SDLC. I'm a big believer in shift left security and shield right, of course, but that as a hacker, this move from monolithic applications now to this sort of microservices based economy where we blinked and APIs are now the plumbing for all parts of life now, financial services, healthcare. You saw that with a lot of my recent research. So, the APIs are part of our life now. And as Jyoti mentioned, originally internally, now they're externally facing, and they're accessible by hackers. And with data being worth more than Bitcoin, hackers know that the APIs are where the wells are. That's where the data is. So, that's where hackers are going to shift their attention.
So, listening to both of you, I can't help but think there's this opposing kind of force here. But APIs are now become like a very enabling technology that if businesses don't take advantage of that, they're going to fall behind. Microservices, APIs, leveraging each other's code, partners' code, and just using these blocks of pieces to kind of innovate on top of it. But how do we find ourselves in a place where companies are struggling with these APIs? You said shadow APIs, or third-party API that they're using. In other words, are all APIs equal? Are we ready for an open use everybody kind of model for everybody to use? What are the things to watch out for?
Jyoti, I'll let you jump in there, and I can follow up.
Sure. The main thing is that APIs are a fact of software engineering, and it will continue to grow. That is how modern software engineering will be done and should be done, because otherwise you really can't innovate fast, without having this reusable, modularized software component services that can talk to each other. So there will be more and more APIs, right? And the other fact is that the pressure on developers to ship things fast would always be there, right? So you can't be that we are building a new API or a new microservice. It will go through 3 months of infosec analysis before we can ship something. That's just not going to happen. People have to move faster and faster. Otherwise, it's the business pressure. You cannot keep up with it. So how do you operate in that world? It's to me, the answer is it starts with take API security seriously. The way people have taken, historically network security and, infrastructure security seriously, you have to really think of API security as a key part of your, cybersecurity posture, as a key part of how you think of the next level of cybersecurity, because that's where hackers will come in. That's where hackers want to come in. That's where the data is, and those are the windows and gates to your to your IT systems, to your applications, to your business really as well. People have to be very conscious about what data is flowing into these APIs. Data is the core of what you need to protect, which is is there sensitive data into it? Is there data into are there data privacy kind of things that someone can exploit, or can some manipulation that can happen through it? Can someone commit fraud because they're using API in a way that it was intended to be used? So these are the things people have to look at, which is what is the API designed for? Are people using the API as designed? Are the right people using the API as designed? What kind of data flows through this? Are people committing some kind of fraud? They're exfiltrating data? Are they stealing users personal private information, sensitive data? Those are the things almost every business has to think very carefully and protect against.
Alissa, what about you? What do you think?
Look here. I'm a self-professed non-developer. Everyone knows that about me, including my followers. So I can't speak to the developer side of this, but what I can tell you is from a hacker's perspective, I care about what data that API is serving, right? So I'm not going to waste my time on an API that isn't serving something that is the crown jewels, so to speak, that I'm going after. For me, the idiosyncratic nuances between different APIs is not whether or not they're created equal or, the language they're written in or anything like that. I don't think in those terms. What I think in terms of is the different attacks that can work against them in order to get access to the data I'm after. Right. So, one final thing I'll add to that is, but the one thing that is going to be the same across all of the APIs I'm targeting is the modus operandi for my kill chain, which again, I covered in the Hubris paper. But that's really, I follow a 4-step process in hacking any API. And one of the first things is reconnaissance, just understanding how the API works, how the API client is interacting with that API. I really believe that as hackers, there's really no black magic to hacking other than learning how it works and then sending stimulus that the developer didn't expect to receive and how it responds to that stimulus. So, to me, that's all hacking is. And you can't do that unless you fully understand how the API works and what it's doing. So that's a combination of network traffic interdiction between the client and the API, which is why preventing those woman in the middle attacks is so important, and not being able to actually analyze it at that level. Footprinting the application basically. And then logic-based attacks, authorization-based attacks, which are so systemic across all of the APIs I've tested. So many developers are remembering to authenticate, but not remembering to authorize. So, they're basically authenticating the API traffic, but not authorizing that. Okay, if Alyssa's logged in, why is she requesting Jyoti's data? Right. So if I'm logged in as Alissa, I shouldn't be requesting any other patient data or any other bank account data besides my own. Right. So it's basic things that's like, security 101 day one, which is authorization. And that's is lacking in my experience through so many of the APIs I've tested, allowing me to move money in and out of accounts, change customer PIN codes, or request or access patient data that doesn't belong to me.
So you are observing and trying to pry out and figure out each API's behavior and the kind of data that it's passing, and who's talking to whom, etc. Let's go back to you, Jyoti. Like you now, you're obviously working towards this, but this means that you need to understand the APIs really intimately well, and not just like I have 6 APIs, and this is from point A to point B, and it has 6 kind of data fields it carries. You need to understand its behavior. You need to understand the context of which this API is working to kind of get around, like the attacks that Melissa is talking about. So why is looking at some of this logic and behavior important for you from a security perspective?
Because there is no other way. If you want to secure these APIs, the only way to secure them is to understand what is the normal usage pattern of these APIs. And if someone is trying to use them in ways that the developers didn't put some right security checks or authorization checks, protection, uh, you have to deny those things, like, because that's what a hacker like Alissa, that's what they are looking, that's what they would look for, that a developer forgot to put some authorization check, that a developer forgot to put some check around, that they're giving out too much data from an API or the wrong data from an API. So from a protection software, like the API security perspective, that's what we have to figure out. So that's what our approach at Traceable is, where you figure out, what is the normal behavior of what data flows, and anytime you see that, there is someone trying to use this, in those corner cases with the developer forgot, which probably not wasn't the normal intended behavior. You flag it, you stop it, you deny it right there. That's really the only way to protect, like, your normal traditional WAF kind of things, where you define some policy based on a regex or some expression or something. That just doesn't work. That's what, Alissa said, like, when she was able to hack, so many of these APIs for tests, but almost all of them were protected by some kind of WAF. The WAF based things fail into these because there is no pattern you can specify. There is no regex you can specify against it. You just have to learn the behavior of data and where developers forgot to put the checks somewhere.
Yeah, I come from the Snort days, right? I go back. I'm a lot older than I look. This is hair coloring. My hair would be fully gray right now if it wasn't for the magic of hair color. But so 20 years ago, back in the old Snort days, you were writing Snort signatures for rules or patterns that you're looking for anomalous traffic that it would check IP headers, the packet headers, and the packet payloads for to identify malicious traffic on the network. Those days of Snort signatures, despite how much respect I have for the Security Onion project, I have an immense amount of respect for that project. That's why we're no longer in the Snort days anymore, and we've moved to machine learning, and we've moved to all these more capabilities, because getting away from pattern-based recognition. This is why Symantec and McAfee and the legacy antivirus companies and solutions have been thrown out and replaced with EDR. Context and security with patterns and signatures and rules like WAFs and legacy WAFs and firewalls that are doing nothing but looking for static patterns, or is trying to keep up with the known knowns, right? What about the unknown unknowns? And the things we just don't know yet about the attacks. History has taught us that we cannot keep up with the attacker. We cannot keep up with the tactics and techniques. How are we supposed to be fortune tellers and figure out what that next API exploit is going to look like, or breach is going to look like, or the next tool is going to be? There's attackers that are actually reversing and understanding supervised machine learning models and figuring out adversarial ML and trying to figure out how to retrain the ML models to not see them, right? They're always going to be one step ahead. I agree with Jyoti. What the thing is that context and security matters. That is why we need API threat management solutions. Why we can't use, just because APIs speak the HTTP protocol doesn't mean we should fall back on what we know, which is protecting web servers because it speaks HTTP. Like, we always fall back as humans. We fall back on what we know. Right? Just because APIs speak HTTP doesn't mean we should protect them or secure them like a web server, right? So we need to look at a dedicated API threat management solution that has context and security and understands what the application is doing. You cannot secure an app if you don't know what it's doing. You need to understand how it works. You need that context and security, because without context, I'm sorry, in 2021, you don't have security without context.
I would 100% agree. But one point I would add there is, Alissa said, you can't keep up with the attackers. But the complexity now is also, you can't keep up with the developers as well, because they are also changing things so much. Like, every hour, every day, they are changing it. So that creates it even more problematic. Like, you really have to find something that's constantly trying to keep up with what developers are building. Like, what the APIs are supposed to do is also changing. It's not static anymore. So you have to have something that's constantly learning, what the developers are changing, what is the intent of the APIs, that the new APIs they have introduced, or the new parameters they've introduced, or if the interaction have changed, and then based on that, you're mapping all of that to the what the attackers are trying to do, and like where the gaps would be. And there is no way any kind of a pattern system, rule-based system would add that. You have to have the learning the context through ML, learning the change that developers are making, and then bringing it all together to protect things.
Yeah. I was going to ask this very question that you answered, Jyoti. It looks like, brute forcing more attacks like AI versus AI is going to increase, but it's not going to help, the protection side of it. I don't think it's going to help either side of it. You're going to have to get beyond brute force. Brute force is always going to be part of this, but as hackers get more intelligent and they start to understand the logic of your APIs, your business, on the protection side, it seems that you have to get ahead of it.
Yeah,
You have
definitely.
to understand, why is this API acting a certain way, at what point of the day, for which user, business logic. So it almost seems like business logic needs to be built into the protection algorithms,
Definitely.
right?
The protection algorithms have to understand the business logic of the API. There is no other way for the protection to understand how the hacker will try to exploit that business logic gap in the API.
So again, now I come back to having discussed that. Alyssa, I asked you towards the beginning of the conversation, but put your CISO hat back on, right? And now that you know both the sides, and you have these teams kind of pushing really hard to release code, and you want to enable the business, like you said, time to market is important to you too. If you had to summarize, to your fellow CISOs, out there, what are the top one or two things or three things that they should be paying a lot of attention to, like in terms of challenges or best practices? What's your advice?
So I could probably fill a whole show on this, and I think I have. The ironic thing was, as a hacker, I have exposure in my multiple hats that I wear to different API security vendors and how they're approaching the API security problem. So much so that Gartner recognized that and brought me in to present to all of their analysts on the state of the API security market, which I thought was ironic considering they were Gartner. Like, shouldn't they be presenting that to me? Anyway, despite that, my advice is a pretty long list, but the most important things, number one, is create your functional requirements document, right? As CISOs, we have a tendency to go out there and look for the shiny new toy. Try and figure out what are your functional requirements from the API security solution, right? Before you go out there and go shopping. Once you've got that FRD created, then look at the vendors out there that offer those capabilities. Those capabilities, in my opinion, as an attacker and as a CISO, as a breaker and a defender, is number one. You can't protect what you don't know you have. Right. I started out very early on working with organizations that had about 1,000 APIs. Now I'm working with a company that's got over 6,000 APIs. How the hell, as a CISO, are you supposed to know what 6,000 APIs are doing and whether or not those are changing in numbers or quantities and what data each one is serving? So you can't protect what you don't know you have. Make sure that the API threat management solution has the capability to give you an inventory or a catalog of what those API endpoints are, right? So there's APIs and then API endpoints, right?
Right.
And so, one single application can have multiple endpoints, right? So, it's really important to know all the endpoints that exist, what data those APIs are serving, right? So where are your crown jewels? We all now, let's point the pink elephant out in the room. We all know that in this day and age, in 2021, you are going to get breached. That's no longer up for question. It's no longer up for debate. It's going to happen. It's lowering the mean time to detection, or MTD, and lowering the mean time to response, or MTTR. In order to lower that mean time to detection, you need to be able to detect that breach faster, right? So if you have 6,000 APIs or even 500 APIs, you need to know where to focus your attention. Why focus my attention on an API that really isn't serving anything that I care about versus an API that's serving my crown jewels or containing regulated data, right? So know which APIs are serving regulated data. The other capability that you want to make sure of is that your API threat management solution, and understand, I underline that word, not your WAF, not anything else, your API threat, not your API gateway with security features. Your API threat management solution, it needs to be able to also tell you actually have application context. So it should know kind of what's behind it, right? It's kind of like how the Snort sensor would alert you to an IIS web application tech when the backend web server is Apache. Like, false positives. We're at a point now where we, we need to eat our own dog food. Which is, like, here's the thing, like, we don't have time to deal with false positives anymore, and vendors know that, and venture capitalists funding the vendors know that. FPs, false positives, trying to find the signal in the noise is paramount to your success as a CISO. Make sure that API threat management solution knows what's behind it and can alert to events that are applicable to your applications you're running.
So
and hack your own APIs.
so seems very daunting in a way, right? So I want to ask a question of Jyoti here. You founded many companies, you've run companies, scaled them, and if you look at a problem like this, which is ever growing in complexity and scale, what's the right approach to this? Is it like hire more people to sit and watch your APIs, get a tool that'll tell you all about APIs, change? It's the classic, people, process, tools question I have for you is like, where do you start and what do you do next? Like, what's your advice to companies out there dealing with it?
That's a good question, Ashish. I think it's important to look at the problem at the intersection of people, process, and technology, all three. You have to start with people. That people have to understand a bit of the that someone owns visibility around it. Like, you have these functions starting to evolve into companies now inside the, either in the software engineering side or the CISO side of the of the organization, around product security, API security, different than your traditional WAF app security kind of approaches, right? But you have to think from a people, like, who is responsible for it. Someone has to own that. There is a process side of it also, like, you process on, how do you what happens when someone is introducing a new API, like, how do you try to shift left most of figuring some of this out. How do you incorporate that into your CI/CD process? What happens when an API breach happens, etc., right? But then there's a technology part. You cannot do things without people and process. That's not enough. You can't keep throwing people at things. People just cannot do this. You have to have the right technology and the right solutions. And there's a lot of innovation happening. Like, Traceable is one of the leading innovators here, I would say. But we have multiple companies in this space that are innovating through technology. VCs are funding companies because there is a big pain, and this pain cannot be addressed without the right technology, which will solve these problems on, like, discover all the APIs. How do you know, like, the 500 APIs or 6,000 APIs, what are they doing? Which ones are changing? Which ones have sensitive data? So you need technology to do that. You need technology to detect a breach, in as soon as possible. You need technology to mitigate the breach as soon as possible. And then you also need technology for people to, for developers to get access to the data, so they can be even more proactive about it. The next time they can, like, say, if there is one breach that happened because there was some exploit somewhere, there might be 20 other exploits in your other 5,000 APIs that are very similar to those. So if you have the right data, you can be proactive about it, and you can plug those, get those gaps, early on, before you are hacked and or exploited there, right? So, and you need technology to do this. So it really has to be a combination of all. Like, you want to have the right habits. And I think on the people side, the most important thing I do feel, it's the security teams cannot do this on their own. They have to bring the DevOps teams together. They have to bring developer teams together. And it's anything in this particular area, it has to be a collaborative exercise between developers and your SecOps teams. And that's either you create a team that is collaborative between them, or you create the right process that can work. It's not possible to silo it completely, right? So then, and that's where we are seeing all the DevSecOps kind of movement. And I think API security is a perfect example of why we need more DevSecOps kind of thinking.
And seems
Yeah,
like collaboration.
I agree with that. Let me quickly chime in here, if it's okay, Ashish.
Yeah.
So putting my CISO hat back on, I think one of the first things that I learned is being a CISO for a bank is, just the obvious requirement that you have to there's a partnership between the CISO's office and the CTO's office, and APIs are a great example of that, and why we need to eliminate this adversarial and polarized relationship between CISOs and CTOs. It needs to be a partnership, because this is that rare security control within an organization that is very much touched by DevOps and infrastructure and operations and security. And it needs to be a shared responsibility, just like cloud service providers have a shared responsibility model with their customers. This is that security control that has a shared responsibility model between IT and security. And I agree with Joe that he took the words out of my mouth. As a CISO, my biggest problem is making sure that the API security control will allow me to quickly copy and paste or right click and send an exploited vulnerability in an API that we're running to my developers in INO and DevOps, and just get that vulnerability over them, whether it's automatically inserted into Jira or something, whatever. But I agree with Jyoti, like no matter where the API security control solution is in its maturity, that's a big, I would say, as a CISO, that's my biggest requirement, is making sure that security control can quickly get that to the developers to fix. One of the things that I recently have been doing is vulnerability researching in banking and cryptocurrency exchanges. And one of the things that I found was when I had actually hacked this financial services company, they outsourced that development of that API to a company. And a lot of companies do this. And that company rinsed and reused that same vulnerable code for 300 other banks. And so, that allowed me to not only just hack one bank, but hack 301 banks. And so because of that rinsing and reusing of code, so Jyoti makes a very good point here. It is so important to be able to have that API threat management solution bridge the gap and be that connective tissue between cybersecurity and DevOps.
Alissa, awesome answer. And actually, in the audience, there's a question which connects to this really well, which is, as a CISO, as you get your own house in order and you get everybody aligned, how are you trying to help your peers, CISOs, prioritize API security? Because there's so many kinds of security problems that they're facing. Compliance is another one. De-risking is what their main job is, right? So how do you prioritize API security over others? Like, how do you help CISOs think about that, given
So
such
for
a
you,
vast,
yeah, for you CISOs in the audience who are watching right now, one of the things that I'm sure you'll agree with me on is that as a CISO, we are nothing more than glorified risk communicators. Even though we
risk
have a seat at the table now, where the adults are sitting, and we're no longer sitting at the kids' table, even though we're officers, it is still a business decision on whether or not they remediate or treat a risk. The business is not going to fix every vulnerability and address every risk, only those that are unacceptable to the business. And we are risk communicators of that. I think as part of my job as a CISO, my biggest responsibility is educating the company on these risks. And one of the things that I have undertaken over the last year at the bank was communicating to DevOps, communicating to infrastructure and operations, how important API security is. And that it's not just a DevOps problem, it's a DevSecOps problem. And so, that is so important. So whoever asked that question, if you're a CISO, that is so important to understand that you need to be constantly educating and informing your developers and IT that when they're deploying new APIs, that security needs to be involved in that project, because we need to be influencing the security around that, or IT will go exactly what they've historically always gone to, which is firewalls. And you just cannot secure APIs effectively with the firewall. It just doesn't work.
Thanks for that, Alissa. Jyoti, here's an interesting question from the audience, and I cannot actually find out the name of this person, and maybe I shouldn't name it here. But they say that they're very glad to kind of hear from two fellow alums like me, Ashish from Kellogg, and you from IIT. So I don't know who this person is. We should find out. But their question is, based on your reference to software engineering. This person says, he or she finds a bunch of quote unquote handyman technicians who will build in microservices but don't necessarily think of it from an architect, a software architect, a software engineering mindset, because they want to get some job done. So then you have to kind of go back and rework and invest in technical and legal controls, some of which you just talked about now, Alyssa, to kind of solve for this, quick plumbing projects that were done to get a business problem done. It's like, if you were building this team out, like, how do you inject this, proper engineering mindset, architectural mindset in, these teams so that they do the right thing, right?
Um, it's an interesting question. I would, I would almost counter the underlying assumption of this question that I don't think it's possible to build a perfectly architected microservices system. Even if you hire the best of the architects and you have the best, the best mindset around it, the speed, is so high, and there's so many moving parts in it that it's there will be some imperfections around it. I think it's a mistake to not invest in the maintenance and like, which is security of your microservices API architecture, monitoring of your secure architecture, quality testing. You need that, like, so any organization should be thinking of, like, if you're spending like 100 developers working on some complex piece of software system with a lot of microservices and interacting with each other, 100 developers are probably costing you, you know 15, 20 million a year at least. Like, to not put like 10, 20, 30% of your investment into the management of that is a mistake, because if you don't put the management of it, then actually you're going to slow it down. So you have really two parts. Like, one is that everything goes through high degree of architecture committees controlling everything, high degree of change management, change approval policies, which slows everything down. Or second is, you allow developers to have more freedom under some, within some guide rails, and developers will do that. Most of the times they will do right things. Sometimes they will make mistakes and it will not be perfect, but you have the right controls and monitoring and security and protection systems to catch those mistakes and kind of react to them fast, right? So it's really, to me, is that it's a balance. Like, it's almost like, you have two ways. Like, one is that everything is so tightly controlled that there is no mistake ever allowed, and but you slow everything down, which is not going to work. Or you allow developers to move fast with high velocity, but you have the monitoring and management layers surrounded that will catch those mistakes and allow you to fix it. So that's how I would encourage people to think around it.
Alyssa, you have any comments to add to that? Do you agree with what Jyoti said, or do you have any differing point of view?
Here's the thing. I believe that there's so much more to security than security controls, right? For me, I agree with Jyoti. Management is important. Weaving security into the software development lifecycle is important. Making sure that you trust the process, and making sure that that process is updated to making sure that security is woven into the fabric of that. I believe that security should be part of a management system that's continuously updated and improved over time. So yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Jyoti said. I think from my perspective, I think security is a business problem. It's not just an IT problem. It's not just a DevOps problem. It's an all of us problem, and everyone needs to be involved in securing and hardening the attack surface that we all operate in being in business today. And whether it's, I think, and one of the other things that I want to try and I want to add here is that we need to get away from this thought process of, oh, these APIs, we don't need to worry about their security because they're partner facing. CTOs, developers, you need to stop thinking that way, because more and more today, if you don't have enough examples of it, supply chain attacks are a thing. And just because your APIs are not facing the internet, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be wrapping security around it and making sure that you can see the traffic that's flowing to and from those partner facing APIs. So no matter what direction, north or south or east or west, that your APIs are facing, you need to be thinking about hardening them and securing them. It all needs to be part of the fabric of your security control framework.
Well, awesome. We're almost at the end of our time. I would love to give both of you an opportunity to share like your final closing comments on this discussion. I want to thank you for your time, both Jyoti and Alissa. I know like you're both running multiple kind of organizations. You're busy. For you to take time to kind of have this discussion, it was wonderful. But I'd love to start with Alissa, you, and closing comments. What can people do? Having learned something from here as a first step.
I think the theme of the day is context and security. And I think the most important thing that everyone needs to understand is that you don't have security without context. And, just putting my hacker hat on, at the end of the day, I don't care about your feud between the CISO's office and the CTO, or, who was right or who was wrong, or, all I care about is what I'm there to either lock and leak, or leak, which is your data. And at the end of the day, my hopes as a hacker is that you think you're secure because you're using a WAF or an API gateway that company's going after the security budget by adding security features. I'm hoping you're relying on those technologies as a hacker, because I'm coming for you. And whether as an ethical hacker, as a penetration tester, I'm coming for you. But black hats out there, adversaries, they're coming for you too. And the only difference between us two is we're both going to get your data. The only thing is that with an adversary, you're not going to know about it until you're a headline in the news. And so the biggest mistake that you can make is I think, disagree with me if you want, but I think it's a more dangerous situation to protect yourself with the wrong security control, like a WAF or an API gateway, then because you have this false sense of security rather than not using anything at all. Right? There may be people who will key my car and disagree with me over that, but I think creating a false sense of security when you think security is there is a more dangerous situation than not having anything at all. Because if you don't have anything at all, at least you need to go buy something, and you have the opportunity to buy the right thing.
And you've summarized, the perils of, you call it the price of hubris in your ebook that, I'm sharing on the screen here that anybody can, download for free. It summarizes your work, how you got around, some of these APIs and defenses, to get to people's data. So I would encourage everybody to do that.
I want to thank you for the QR code, because that's amazing. I think this is the first time in a while I've ever seen a QR code. That's amazeballs. And I do want to, I got to do it. I got to do it, Ashish. But Jyoti, you may hate me for this, but I tell the audience, go subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's the best way you can support me as a content creator. Follow me on links, subscribe to me, follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter. And I appreciate it. Thank you for having me as a guest here. It's been awesome nerding out with you, Jyoti.
Awesome. Thanks, Alissa. How about you, Jyoti? Your closing comments?
First of all, I hope no one keys Alissa's car for sale. That's a good solution for protecting your APIs. Like it's just not, and people need to figure that out and learn that and accept that. Like we need to rethink how APIs are secure, and that's not your traditional WAFs that won't do the job. And you have to think about it and get started with API security. And at Traceable, I would plug that just to make that happen. Like, and how do we make it easy? That's why we created a free version of Traceable product. So there is an entry level free version. You can download, and you can just go to our website traceable.ai/free and sign up for it. And in a matter of minutes, you can start getting visibility inside what your APIs are, which APIs are risky, and you can even start like detecting some of the attacks that are happening and protecting. And we made it free so that there is less barrier to entry for people to get going and educate themselves about API security and try something out. So I would highly encourage, if you're in the audience, you think API security is something you should think seriously about, which I would highly encourage. If you have APIs, start with our free product.
Even if you think you don't have APIs, I think you might find APIs what you refer to as shadow APIs. Thank you again, Jyoti. Thank you very much, Alissa, and we hope to have you back again as guests on the next episode of a discussion on API security. Thank you very much, and everyone, thanks for joining us, and see you soon.